In 1942, a lone woman with a wooden leg trekked through the snowy mountains of France, evading Nazis at every turn. Her name was Virginia Hall, and she was one of WWII's most feared spies. But how did a civilian woman become so dangerous that the Gestapo put a price on her head? Tonight, we'll uncover the secret night operations that made her legendary, from coded messages hidden in laundry to midnight rendezvous with resistance fighters. This is the untold story of how darkness became a spy's greatest ally. A spy moving through a city at night couldn't just blend in. They had to become invisible. Every shadow had to be mapped, every sound calculated. The Nazis had patrols with flashlights sweeping alleys, guard dogs sniffing doorways, and curfews that turned empty streets into death traps. If you stepped wrong, you didn't get a second chance. Virginia Hall faced an extra problem. Her prosthetic leg made a faint clicking sound when she walked. So she wrapped the foot in cloth and timed her steps to match background noises. Passing cars, wind in the trees, even distant church bells. She moved only when something else made sound, turning her weakness into part of the rhythm of the night. Other agents took notes from burglars, learning to press against walls where shadows pooled thickest, or to cross moonlight in 3 swift steps, because 4 would put them in a guard-side line. They avoided cobblestones that rattled, stuck, to grass verges when possible, and memorized patrol routes down to the minute. One SWE agent in Paris noted that German soldiers lit cigarettes at 11:20 p.m. sharp during shift changes. That 90-second window became his signal to move. Silence wasn't enough. You had to know when the darkness itself worked for you. Moonless nights were ideal, but a half moon could be used if you kept its angle in mind. Shadows cast by chimneys or trees created moving blind spots. Agents practiced shadow walking, placing each foot flat and rolling from heel to toe like a cat. Some sewed felt onto their shoe soles. One manual advised holding your breath while passing sentry posts to mute the sound of exhalation. It wasn't just about hiding. The best spies used darkness aggressively. A resistance fighter in lines would toss pebbles against a distant wall to lure guards away from their posts, then slip through the gap. Safe houses had blackout curtains, hung behind regular drapes to prevent light leaks, and cellars were preferred over upstairs rooms. Cooler air muted coughs. An SWE trainer observed that most recruits instinctively ducked when entering a dark room, which was exactly wrong. Standing straight made you a vertical line less noticeable against doorframes. The Gestapo knew to scan at chest height, so seasoned. Agents crouched or pressed flat to floors where the eye didn't naturally travel. Clothing choices mattered. Pure black stood out against gradations of night, so spies wore navy or charcoal. Well, didn't rustle like cotton. A Belgian operative dyed her coat with mud to match local brickwork, letting her freeze in place against buildings. The real trick wasn't avoiding detection. It was controlling when and how you were seen. Double agents would deliberately let patrols glimpse them at a distance, then disappear around a corner to reinforce the illusion they were ghosts. Urban spies kept mental maps of every awning, storm drain, and cellar entrance. One report describes an agent escaping through a bakery's coal chute after losing pursuers by squeezing between 2 parked trams. Rural operatives scouted tree cover and creek beds. The goal was never to run. Panic got you killed. You stepped slowly, used distractions, and above all, trusted that the night had folds even the brightest searchlight couldn't penetrate. Hall once hid from a Gestapo raid by standing inside a hotel's dumbwaiter shaft for 2 hours, her wooden leg braced against the walls. Another agent evaded capture by lying in a cemetery's freshly dug grave until dawn. Darkness didn't care about your rank or training. It would hide you or expose you with equal indifference. The difference between living and dying came down to who understood its rules best. BY 1944, German counterintelligence reports complained of shadows that moved incorrectly. They weren't imagining things. The best spies had learned to weaponize the dark, turning it into something that didn't just conceal, it attacked. A blown bridge or sabotaged train wasn't just an act of war. It was the night itself striking back. The price for mastery was steep. One mistake, a sneeze, a watch glint, a shoelace snapping, could unravel everything. But when done right, a single operative could slide through an enemy stronghold like ink and water. Restaurants and train stations became places where people vanished between heartbeats. That was the art, not just disappearing, but making the darkness part of the act. A spy's survival depended on messages, but paper was poison. Any scrap with writing could send you to a Gestapo cell if found. So they turned everyday items into secret carriers of information. A housewife hanging her laundry wasn't just drying clothes. She might be signaling which roads were clear for an arms drop. The colors of shirts on the line, the direction of clothespins, even the spacing between socks could indicate safe houses or warn of patrols. Flower arrangements in cafe windows looked innocent but functioned as bulletin boards. A red tulip in the third vase meant a dead drop was compromised. 2 white roses tilted left signaled a meeting time change. The SOE trained agents to memorize over 80 floral codes before deployment. A single misplaced petal could mean walking into an ambush. Knitting patterns hid some of the most complex messages. Stitch counts translated to grid coordinates. Pearl stitches might represent German tanks, while a knit 2 together could mark an ammunition depot. One French resistance cell transmitted entire attack plans through what looked like a simple scarf. The knitter would accidentally leave the unfinished work on a park bench, where another agent could find it and continue the pattern and the message. Restaurants became covert communication hubs. A spy ordering coffee black with 2 sugars wasn't being picky. It told the waiter which documents to retrieve from behind a loose brick in the bathroom. Menus had coded dishes listing safe crossing points along the Swiss border. One agent smuggled microfilm inside a hollowed-out baguette so often that his handlers started calling him Baker. Clock towers turned into silent messengers. The time shown when a church bell struck noon might indicate how many enemy troops were stationed nearby. Resistance fighters in Amsterdam used bicycle tire marks on walls. The angle of the streaks revealed where airdrops would land that night. Even children's sidewalk chalk games plotted sabotage targets when viewed from upstairs windows. Dead drops favored items too ordinary to search. A specific crack in a train platform for tucked messages, the hollow heel of a shoe left for repair, or a cemetery headstone with a loose base. One inventive courier sealed notes inside tomatoes and left them in a grocer's discount bin. The recipient would accidentally crush the vegetable to retrieve the message. Audio signals required perfect timing. A cough on the half-hour meant abort the meeting. 3 taps followed by 2 on a train compartment's glass indicated a clear path. Some spies used wooden matches. Striking 1 meant danger, 2 meant proceed. The SOE issued agents with specially modified whistles that mimicked bird calls, but at frequencies only trained ears could decode. Books circulated through libraries with invisible ink notes between the lines. A Dutch resistance group used library due dates as code. A book returned 3 days late might coordinate a weapons delivery. Another cell printed fake ration coupons with tiny puncture marks spelling out Luftwaffe base coordinates in Braille-like dots. The best codes exploited German prejudices. Since Nazis considered women poor at math, female agents often used shopping lists with buried calculations indicating troop movements. One Polish operative sent flower prices to her mother that actually detailed train schedules. The decimals corresponded to departure times. Barbershops became intelligence gold mines. A request for half off the sides might trigger the barber to reveal dead drop locations while pretending to make small talk. Hair tonic bottles on the shelf sometimes had false bottoms containing maps. One agent in Lyon escaped a raid because his barber tipped him off with an accidental nick from the razor, their prearranged danger signal. Animal codes added another layer. A dog barking twice at midnight signaled a clear path, while 3 barks meant stay put. Carrier pigeons carried microfilm capsules, but their feathers were also marked with dye to indicate if they'd been intercepted. One inventive group trained cats to gather at certain windowsills when informants needed extraction. The Germans never suspected the stray cats were on payroll. The most effective messages looked like mistakes. A misprinted theater poster listing. The wrong date concealed meeting details in its errors. A cafe owner in Marseilles placed salt shakers at specific table positions to show which ports were under surveillance. These systems worked because they weren't flawless. Real life had imperfections, so perfection would have been suspicious. Breakdowns in communication were catastrophic. In 1943, An SOE cell in Normandy was wiped out because heavy rain washed away the chalk marks they used as signals. Another group was betrayed when a spy forgot to remove the third blue handkerchief from a clothesline, inadvertently telling the resistance the safe house was compromised. Every message was a gamble where losing meant torture chambers in the Avenue Foch. WWII 1944, German counterintelligence estimated that over 60% of civilian activities in Paris contained some form of coded information. They were probably right. The sheer volume of signals blending into daily life made them impossible to stop. A dropped mitten in a tram wasn't just a lost item. It might be announcing that D-Day was coming. When the Allies landed, many crucial instructions had been hiding in plain sight for months, woven into the fabric of ordinary existence. Code breaking wasn't just about ciphers. It was about reimagining reality so that nothing was what it seemed. A yawn could be an alert. A dropped coin might redirect an entire operation. And the old woman feeding pigeons? She wasn't tossing breadcrumbs. She was plotting coordinates with every throw. The brilliance of these systems wasn't in their complexity, but in their camouflage. Truth hid best when dressed as trivia. Simple worked. Complex got you caught. A torn train ticket stub left on a cafe table was just trash unless you knew the rip's angle marked an ambush site. The SOE's most successful spies carried nothing more suspicious than grocery lists and theater programs. Their weapon wasn't the pistol strapped to their thigh. It was the ability to make the whole world wink. Curfew turned cities into ghost towns, but for spies, it was showtime. The streets emptied, patrols stuck to predictable routes, and darkness became an asset rather than a threat. They didn't call it night for nothing. This was when the serious work happened. You might imagine cloak and dagger meetings in alleyways, but most operations were far more technical. Sabotage required precision timing, and night provided the perfect cover. Railways were prime targets. SOE agents would case stations during the day, memorizing guard rotations and noting where shadows collected near switchboxes. Then at 2 a.m., they'd slip in with magnetic explosives no bigger than a cigarette case. The charges weren't placed randomly. Trains carrying troops got devices near the engine for maximum disruption. Supply trains? Middle cars, to spread derailment chaos. One team in Belgium took out 6 troop transports in a week using this method. Each attack timed between guard shifts, when the station master was brewing tea and the night watchman had just lit a cigarette. Urban missions had tighter margins. Cutting phone lines to isolate Gestapo headquarters meant scaling poles in total darkness, wearing rubber gloves to avoid shocks. Some agents carried special pliers that muffled the sound of snipping wire. Others tapped lines using induction, coils wound with silk thread to prevent telltale vibrations. The Gestapo's switchboard operators would suddenly find calls dropping, not suspecting that a resistance fighter was crouched in a nearby attic, rerouting communications through a hidden recorder. Safe houses turned into workshops after midnight. Women assembled bombs using kitchen scales to measure powdered explosives, storing components in flour bins. Men modified weapons with oilcloth-wrapped tools, filing down firing pins for silent operation. One SOE report describes an agent who repurposed a child's chemistry set to test acid for etching serial numbers off stolen guns. The real danger wasn't the work itself. It was the glow of a single uncovered bulb. Blackout curtains were mandatory, but even so, seasoned operatives worked by touch whenever possible. Airfields were high-value targets, but crawling across open tarmac was suicide. Instead, agents exploited German predictability. Hangar guards followed fixed routes, pausing at specific spots to stamp their feet against the cold. Teams used these pauses to inch forward, planting explosives on fuel trucks or perforating aircraft tires with ice pick-like tools. One French unit specialized in contaminating oxygen tanks, a trick they discovered when a confiscated Luftwaffe manual listed the exact intervals for ground crew inspections. Suburban operations were quieter, but equally critical. Wiretapping required accessing junction boxes on telephone poles, often under the guise of repairing roof tiles. Agents would position ladders during daylight hours, subtly loosening bolts so they could remove panels silently later. The best wiretappers worked in pairs, one to extract the recordings, another watching for patrols with a hand signal system. A single cough meant abort. 2 taps on a pipe signaled all clear. Gestapo counter-surveillance teams knew these boxes were vulnerable but couldn't watch them all. Moon phases dictated schedules. A curved moon cast sideways shadows perfect for hiding along walls, while a full moon meant staying cellar-bound unless the mission was urgent. Cloud cover was ideal, but freezing rain posed problems. It made footsteps quieter, but also left betraying imprints. One Norwegian team avoided this by laying down burlap sacks as they walked, retrieving them later to erase their trail. Countryside operations had different challenges. With no streetlights, navigation relied on memorized landmarks. That crooked oak, the burned-out barn. Teams marked paths with reflective tacks pushed into tree bark at knee height, visible only if you knew where to shine a covered torch. Some used luminous paint on fence posts, applying it thinly enough to fade by dawn. Electronic sabotage was a new frontier. Late in the war, SOE teams began targeting radar stations using modified medical equipment. Portable X-ray machines could overload sensitive electronics if placed correctly. One technician in Calais disabled an entire coastal monitoring station by swapping vacuum tubes during a maintenance blackout. His toolkit was just a doctor's bag full of altered components. The deadliest jobs happened closest to dawn. By 4:30 a.m., human circadian rhythms hit their lowest point. Guards nodded off. Dogs stopped alerting to familiar noises. One SOE manual advised placing explosives with timers set for 5:15 a.m., when fatigue and shift changes created maximum vulnerability. A team in Holland perfected this by sabotaging Nazi officers' alarm clocks the previous day, ensuring groggy replacements arrived late. Extraction was the most precarious phase. Safe houses were often compromised by dawn, forcing agents into last-minute hideouts like coal bunkers or church crypts. Some buried themselves under leaf piles in parks, breathing through hollow reeds until night returned. The best operators had pre-arranged cover jobs, a milkman's route, a baker's early start, giving them legitimate reasons to be moving at first light. Night wasn't downtime. It was when gears turned, when fragile alliances were tested, when the quietest hands shaped the war's course. Every blown bridge started with someone counting guard rotations in the dark. Every intercepted message required sleepless hours of listening. The irony? Most spies had to function normally the next day, blending in while running on stolen naps and black market caffeine. Sunset didn't bring rest. It brought the real work. Safe houses promised rest, but delivered paranoia. That creaking floorboard wasn't just old wood. It might be a Gestapo boot. Spies slept in shifts, always one person awake to listen for trouble. They'd wedge chairs under doorknobs, scatter broken glass near windows as makeshift alarms, and keep knives taped under tables for quick grabs. The best hideouts had escape routes planned down to the second. A back alley, a rooftop ladder, even a dumbwaiter shaft like the one Virginia Hall used in Lyon. Bedrooms were death traps. Too obvious. Experienced operatives preferred hidden spaces. A false panel behind a wardrobe, a crawl space above the ceiling. One SOE agent in Paris slept inside a hollowed-out chimney stack, entering through the attic after removing just 3 bricks. Another curled up in a priest's confessional booth, figuring Nazis wouldn't violate the sanctity of the church. The rule was simple: never sleep where you'd logically look for someone hiding. Sound discipline was brutal. A sneeze could kill you. Agents stuffed blankets around doors to muffle snores, chewed leather strips to suppress coughs, and trained themselves to wake without moving. Some placed metal basins under beds to catch sweat drops before they hit the floor. One manual suggested sleeping with a damp cloth over your face to prevent talking in your sleep. The truly paranoid went further. A Belgian resistance fighter reportedly wore a gag at night after nearly giving away his unit's location by mumbling about munitions drops. City apartments had unique risks. Shared walls carried noise, so spies avoided couches. Springs squeaked. Floors were worse, with transmitted vibrations like a drum. The solution? Mattresses on the floor, but not directly. They'd layer rugs underneath, then place the mattress at an angle to distribute weight unevenly. A Gestapo raid on a Marseille safe house once missed 2 agents because their sleeping setup didn't trigger the floor's telltale creaking pattern. Countryside hideouts weren't safer, just different. Barn lofts worked if you didn't mind rats. Haystacks were warm but attracted patrol dogs. One clever group in Normandy hollowed out a manure pile, lining it with tarpaulins to create a surprisingly breathable, if fragrant, sleeping niche. The smell kept even the dogs away. Tools mattered. A good spy kit included earplugs made of beeswax to drown out street noise, but not so effective you'd miss warning shouts. Pocket watches with no second hand prevented ticks from giving away your position. Some agents carried small mirrors to angle under doors before sleeping, checking hallways for boots without moving. The real pros exploited human psychology. They'd leave a lamp burning in the front room to suggest occupancy while actually sleeping in the cellar. Others deliberately placed shoes by the door, but always slightly misaligned, making the space look casually lived in rather than staged. One team in Brussels avoided detection by leaving a radio playing at low volume, masking nighttime noises while implying someone was home listening. Food was a liability. Snoring increased after meals, so veterans ate light at night. No alcohol. Despite the temptation, it slowed reflexes and loosened tongues. Tea was safer, though boiling water risked kettle whistles. The smartest operators prepared thermoses during daylight hours. Coffee helped, but grinding beans was noisy. Pre-ground coffee stored in falsified medicine bottles solved that. Weather changed everything. Rain on rooftops provided cover for movement, but also hid approaching footsteps. Winter meant frozen pipes that groaned at odd hours, perfect for masking hurried escapes. Summer brought open windows and mosquito nets that could be repurposed as makeshift alarms. Just attach some loose cutlery that'd clatter if disturbed. Personal habits got scrutinized. Smoking was stupid. The glow could be seen for blocks. And butts left evidence. Nail biting left telltale scraps. Even reading was risky. Page turns made noise. Some agents memorized entire documents by moonlight to avoid lamplight, then burned the papers in stovepipes where the smoke wouldn't draw notice. The worst nights came after close calls. Adrenaline made sleep impossible, but exhaustion was worse. SOE trainers taught a breathing technique. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8, to force the body to rest. It worked, unless you'd just seen a comrade captured. Then nothing helped except waiting for dawn and the slim chance they wouldn't talk. Children posed unexpected dangers. A crying baby could expose a whole block. One French operative nearly got caught because his landlady's toddler started banging pots at 3 a.m., the exact time Gestapo usually changed patrols. After that, teams avoided houses with kids under 4. The truly desperate resorted to pharmaceuticals. SOE issued benzodrine tablets for emergencies, but veterans warned against them. The crash left you useless for days. Better to chew coffee beans or sip vinegar-spiked water. One agent in the Ardennes survived on a cocktail of apple cider and powdered adrenaline for 72 hours straight. He later said the hallucinations were almost worth it. Safe house etiquette was unforgiving. No shoes near beds. No talking after dark unless absolutely necessary. Bathroom trips were scheduled events. Too much flushing raised suspicions. The best operatives could go 12 hours without moving from their hiding spots. One report describes a Dutch spy who urinated into a hollowed-out loaf of bread rather than risk leaving his attic perch. Waking up was as dangerous as sleeping. Eyes took precious seconds to adjust. Veterans kept pistols in hand overnight because fumbling for one could cost lives. A British agent in Greece survived an ambush simply because he'd slept clutching his gun. The click of his safety disengaging froze the intruders long enough for him to roll behind a dresser. Sleep deprivation became a weapon. Gestapo interrogators kept lights on for days to break prisoners. Resistance cells countered by rotating members through rest houses. Remote cabins where agents could collapse for 24 uninterrupted hours before going back into the field. The cost of these respites? Often another operative had to stay awake to guard them. In the end, rest wasn't recovery. It was just another mission parameter. You slept when you could, where you could, however you could. If you got 4 solid hours, you were lucky. 3 was standard. 2 meant you'd probably survive the next day. And 1, well, at least you wouldn't die well rested. Darkness wasn't foolproof. It hid you until it didn't. A stray cloud drifting away from the moon at the wrong moment. A careless flicker from a match as you lit a cigarette. Then suddenly you were visible, and visibility meant death. The Nazis knew this. They waited for mistakes, scanning rooftops with infrared scopes by 1944. setting traps where shadows pooled thickest. A single misstep could unravel everything. Moonlight was the most dangerous ally. It changed without warning, shifting angles to expose movement. One SOE agent in line got caught when he paused under a street lamp just as clouds cleared, silhouetted, perfectly against a white wall. His mistake? Not checking the almanac for lunar phases. Experienced operatives plan missions around moon cycles, avoiding bright nights unless absolutely necessary. Even then, they'd smear mud on cheekbones to reduce reflection or wear hats with wide brims to keep faces in permanent shadow. Flash malfunctions were lethal. Pressing the shutter on a spy camera created a faint glow, visible from yards away in absolute darkness. One operative photographing troop movements near Bordeaux gave himself away this way. Another agent accidentally triggered his flashlight. While crawling under a train car, the beam lit up the entire undercarriage like a stage. The solution? Cameras were modified by SOE technicians to release their shutter with a silent thread pull mechanism. Flashlights got hoods with slits so narrow you couldn't even see the light unless standing directly in front of it. Sound betrayed more spies than light ever did. A cough, a snapped twig, the rustle of clothing as you reached for something small. Noises carried at night. German patrols knew this. They'd stop periodically to listen, standing motionless for minutes at a time. One Gestapo manual instructed officers to hold their breath during these pauses, the better to catch whispers. A resistance fighter in Marseille was captured because his fake passport papers rustled when he reached for them at a checkpoint. After that, agents started sandwiching documents between layers of silk to eliminate the sound, whether turned against you. Snow reflected everything, making black clothing stand out like ink on paper. Rain made footing treacherous. One slip could send you crashing into a trash can. Fog seemed helpful until you realized it muffled approaching footsteps too. An SOE team in Belgium got ambushed because they didn't hear bicycles coasting silently through the mist behind them. After that, operatives carried small brass bells to toss occasionally behind themselves as primitive motion alarms. Then there were the interrogations. Getting caught at night meant special treatment. The Gestapo's knacked UND Nebel, night, and fog. Policy disappeared prisoners into unmarked cells where questioning happened during circadian low points between 2 to 5 a.m. Bright lights, sleep deprivation, and timed beatings broke victims faster than any tools. They dragged confessions out of you inch by inch, not because they needed information, but because they wanted you exhausted enough to name everyone you'd ever met. One captured wireless operator held out for 72 hours before giving his SOE. Handler's location. By sunrise, the entire cell was dead. Torture wasn't theatrical pulling out fingernails, too much blood, too noisy. Instead, they used pressure, needles under kneecaps, ice baths timed precisely to induce hypothermia without unconsciousness. Most effective was the standing cell, where prisoners couldn't sit or lie down until their legs gave out. A British agent described breaking after 40 hours in one. I'd have told them my mother's maiden name if they'd just let me kneel. Some betrayals came from the dark itself. Infiltrators would memorize resistance codes, then wait in safe houses to ambush returning agents. They knew the signals: 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more, enough to get the door open before anyone realized it wasn't their contact. By 1943, the Gestapo controlled over half the resistance networks in Paris through this method. You couldn't trust shadows anymore. Equipment failures sealed fates. A torch battery dying mid-mission left you blind. Silk gloves lost grip at crucial moments. Worst were the boots. Leather soles gone stiff with cold would scuff unexpectedly against stone. One agent recounted freezing mid-step when his shoes screeched like chalk on slate. He survived by staying motionless for 2 hours until the patrol moved on, but most weren't that lucky. Chemical lights were disasters waiting to happen. SOE issued light pills could illuminate a map for 30 seconds, handy unless you accidentally crushed one in your pocket. An operative in Norway nearly blew his position when a cracked pill lit up his coat lining during a checkpoint search. After that, agents wrapped them individually in wax paper and stored them in tobacco tins to prevent leaks. Animals turned traitor. Dogs barked at strangers. Cats rubbed against legs at inopportune times. Rats scampering through rafters masked. Footsteps until suddenly they didn't. One team avoided detection for weeks until a startled pigeon burst from their hiding place as a patrol passed. The Gestapo shot the bird, then the spies. The cruelest failures came from misplaced trust. Moonlight through a familiar window at the wrong angle could reveal a waiting ambush. A cellar door left slightly ajar, normally nothing, might mean someone had forced entry. One wireless operator ignored these signs, assuming his landlady had simply forgotten. She had, but the Gestapo hadn't. When the dark stopped protecting you, options narrowed fast. Running meant noise. Fighting meant light from gunfire. Freezing in place worked only if they didn't have dogs. Some agents carried cyanide capsules, though SOE discouraged it. Dead spies couldn't feed misinformation during interrogations. Better to spill false leads while buying time for others to escape. The night giveth, and the night taketh away. It hid your movements until a cloud passed. Silenced your steps until a floorboard creaked. Kept your secrets right up until it didn't. Shadow work was a gamble where losing meant spotlights on your face and a pistol at your temple. No moon, no stars, just the sudden understanding that none of the darkness had ever really been yours. Standard issue weapons were useless in the dark. A regular pistol's muzzle flash might as well have been a spotlight. SOE technicians spent years perfecting tools that worked with the night instead of against it. The Welrod silenced, pistol-topped. The list, firing at just 73 decibels, quieter than a whispered conversation, with a bolt-action mechanism to eliminate shell ejection noises. Agents called it the whispering death. But even this had limits. You got exactly 8 shots before needing to reload, and the rubber baffles dampening the sound degraded after 30 rounds. Knives required special treatment too. Standard steel, glinted under moonlight, so armorers bead-blasted blades to create matte finishes. Some daggers got coated with lamp black mixed with grease, effective until rain washed it off. The real innovation was the double-edged commando knife with one serrated side and one smooth. The teeth could saw through ropes quietly, while the straight edge was reserved for quieter work. One captured SOE agent later told the Gestapo, "I wasn't afraid of the knife at your throat. I was afraid of the one you never saw coming." Even flashlights became precision instruments. Regular beams could be spotted from 200 yards away. Modified versions used lenses that focused light into razor-thin lines only visible if you were standing directly in front of them. Some had sliding shutters allowing just enough glow to read a map, about the brightness of a lightning bug. A favorite technique involved placing the flashlight inside a tin can with a pinhole puncture, creating a directional beam no thicker than a pencil. Lockpicks got the same treatment. Standard sets jingled, so armorers wrapped each pick in chamois leather. Tension wrenches were redesigned with rubber grips to prevent telltale metal-on-metal scraping. One burglar-turned-agent taught recruits to lick picks before insertion. Saliva acted as a temporary lubricant that dried silent within minutes. The ultimate prize was the ice pick, a lockpick made of frozen water that melted after use, leaving no evidence. Explosives posed unique challenges. Dynamite needed blasting caps that sparked visibly. The solution? Time pencils, chemical delay fuses that took anywhere from 10 minutes to 24 hours to detonate, with no visible countdown. Agents could arm a charge and walk away casually. The downside was temperature sensitivity. A cold night might delay the explosion by hours, while summer heat could trigger it prematurely. One team in Greece learned this the hard way when their 12-hour charges went off in 9, nearly taking out their own extraction vehicle. Wireless sets were particularly vulnerable. The standard suitcase-sized radio drew too much power, causing lights to dim suspiciously when transmitting. Compact versions emerged, some small enough to fit inside books or hollowed-out loaves of bread. The Paraset model could be disassembled into harmless-looking components. Its tuning dial passed as a pressure gauge. The transformer resembled a doorbell mechanism. Operators memorized Morse code rather than keeping written copies, tapping out messages with gloves to muffle key clicks. Infrared technology arrived late, but changed everything. By 1944, some teams deployed sniper scopes that used infrared illuminators invisible to the naked eye. Early models weighed 16 pounds and gave users massive headaches, but they could spot heat signatures through walls. One agent in Alsace located an entire Gestapo field office by scanning buildings for warmer patches indicating bodies inside. The Germans eventually caught on, draping wet sheets over windows to diffuse thermal signatures. Chemical weapons took bizarre turns. Capsaicin extracted from chili peppers found its way into aerosol canisters, sneeze-inducing mists for temporary blinding. One inventor created stink pellets that smelled like rotting meat when crushed, useful for clearing guard posts without violence. Then there were the L-pills, cyanide capsules disguised as aspirin, kept in hollow coat buttons in case of capture. Cameras required equally clever adaptations. Standard shutter clicks echoed in quiet streets. Spies used handkerchiefs to muffle the mechanism or placed cameras inside bags with holes cut for lenses. Miniature cameras like the Tessina shot photos through a waistcoat buttonhole, advanced by winding a tiny knob disguised as a pocket watch crown. Film cassettes were repurposed as cigarette tins, developed in makeshift darkrooms using chemical baths prepared in teacups. Even mundane items became stealth weapons. Shoelaces impregnated with abrasives could saw through rope over time. Button compasses contained tiny swiveling needles visible only under direct light. One memorable gadget was the coal bomb. Explosives molded to resemble household coal lumps, perfect for sabotaging train tenders. Operatives would accidentally spill a few pieces into locomotive coal cars, then wait for the boiler explosions. The true brilliance lay in misdirection. Weapons disguised as everyday objects worked best because they defied expectations. A fountain pen that shot .22 caliber rounds seemed ridiculous until an SOE operative in Prague used one to assassinate a high-ranking SS officer during a document signing. Another agent smuggled a garrote inside an umbrella shaft, the same model later. Used in the infamous assassination of Georgy Markov years later, tool maintenance became ritual. Silencers were disassembled and scrubbed with vinegar to remove telltale gunpowder residue. Knives got sharpened on the unglazed bottoms of ceramic bowls to prevent distinctive grind marks. Radio operators learned to twirl pencils between their fingers, ostensibly idle fidgeting, actually adjusting antenna tuners. The weapons themselves weren't inherently special. A knife was still a knife. But in darkness, the difference between life and death came down to preparation. A pistol that didn't glow, a shoe that didn't squeak, a flashlight that revealed nothing. These weren't tools. They were advantages measured in seconds. When every mission balanced on the edge of discovery, those seconds were everything. The best operatives knew nobody won in the dark. You just lost more slowly. 3 a.m. was when the night stopped being useful and started being dangerous. The adrenaline from earlier missions wore off. Eyes got heavy. Reaction time slowed just as German guards were changing shifts. Fresh patrols with sharp eyes and loaded rifles. An SOE operative's diary entry from 1943 describes it perfectly. The long hour. Too late to work, too early for dawn. Just you and the ticking clock wondering who else is awake. Caffeine was the first line of defense. Not coffee. Grinding beans made noise, and brewing created steam that could escape blackout curtains. Instead, agents chewed caffeine pills or soaked tea leaves directly under their tongues. Some preferred chocolate if they could get it. The sugar helped, but the real trick was the theobromine, a milder stimulant that didn't cause the jitters of pure caffeine. One Belgian operative survived 3 days on nothing but 85% cocoa bars stolen from a German supply depot. Cold water worked when stimulants ran out. Agents would fill their mouths from canteens, then let the water dribble slowly down their chins to shock themselves awake. Some carried vials of ammonia to sniff, the same trick surgeons used during marathon operations. A resistance fighter in Paris swore by pushing needles under his fingernails. It wasn't pleasant, but it kept him alive through 6 months of night missions. The smartest operatives scheduled tasks to fight fatigue. Between 2:30 and 3:45 a.m., they'd do equipment checks, silently cleaning weapons or reorganizing supplies. The mechanical work kept hands busy while giving tired brains simple focus. One manual recommended reciting poetry during lulls. The rhythmic structure supposedly helped maintain alertness better than silence. A British agent caught memorizing Shakespeare during a stakeout later claimed he was just practicing code phrases. Guard shifts were both a threat and an opportunity. Most German units changed over between 2:50 and 3:10 a.m. The incoming guards were alert, but the outgoing ones were careless, thinking about hot coffee and warm beds. Experienced spies timed movements for exactly 3:05 a.m. when both groups assumed the other was watching. A French resistance cell perfected this by synchronizing their watches with captured German timepieces, matching military precision down to the second. Whispered conversations kept morale up. Agents paired off to exchange quiet jokes or mission updates, lips brushing ears to muffle sound. One SOE trainer advised speaking in questions. The brain engages more when anticipating a response. A typical exchange might go, "Hear that, Al? The fake one or the real one?" Exactly. The back and forth prevented microsleeps, those dangerous 3-second lapses where your brain shuts off without warning. Breathing techniques were critical. The standard method was 4 counts in, 7 counts hold, 8 counts out. SOE trainers claimed it oxygenated blood better than gulping air. Some agents hyperventilated on purpose before risky moves, flooding their systems with oxygen to buy an extra 30 seconds of steady hands. The downside? Overdo it, and you'd pass out mid-mission. False alarms preyed on tired minds. A cat knocking over a bottle became a grenade. Wind in trees turned into whispers. The worst were auditory hallucinations, one wireless operator reported. Hearing Morse code in dripping faucets so clearly, he took down 16 gibberish messages before realizing his mistake. Veteran agents learned to verify everything visually first. If your eyes didn't confirm it, it wasn't real. Body temperature was a silent enemy. Cold numbed fingers, making it hard to pick locks or prime explosives. Some operatives rubbed vinegar on their necks. The mild acid created a warming illusion. Others did isometric exercises in hiding spots, clenching and releasing muscles to generate heat without movement. The real pros knew to avoid alcohol, no matter how tempting. That false warmth came at the cost of sharpness, and one slow reaction was all it took. Diaries from the period show the psychological toll. An unnamed agent wrote, 3 a.m. is when you remember the faces of everyone you've gotten killed. Another described counting his breaths to stay sane, each exhale whispering. A different name from home. The SOE eventually issued tiny flipbooks with family photos for operatives to glance at during low moments, not out of kindness, but because agents who remembered why they fought lasted longer. The most vulnerable moment came after completing a task. That's when relief trickled in, muscles relaxed, and guards happened upon careless spies celebrating too soon. The solution? Never stop assuming you were being watched. One instructor made recruits practice pretending to work for 10 extra minutes after finishing exercises, just to build the habit. Another taught the double check. When you think you're safe, wait exactly 180 seconds, then verify again. Radio. Operators had it worst. Cramped in freezing attics or damp basements. They couldn't move or make noise between transmissions. Some developed radio leg, muscle atrophy from sitting still for days. The smart ones did toe curls inside their boots or rotated their ankles in slow circles to maintain circulation. One famously tapped Morse code with his teeth during silences, the vibrations keeping him alert when nodding off meant missing a crucial message. Dawn brought its own problems. Eyes adjusted to darkness became painfully sensitive to first light. Agents squinted through watery eyes, often missing threats in the sudden glare. The smartest wore sunglasses long before sunrise, letting their vision adjust gradually. Others smeared dirt on their eyelids, primitive blackout curtains for the eyeballs. The loneliest hour didn't end at 4 a.m. It ended when you either completed your mission or got caught. For Virginia Hall, it lasted 14 months of nights. In Nazi-occupied France. For others, it lasted exactly as long as their luck held out. The difference between surviving and failing wasn't gear or training. It was understanding that 3 a.m. wasn't a time. It was a test. And every shadow was. The examiner. Guard dogs were spies' worst natural enemies. They didn't need flashlights or checkpoints, just their noses and ears. The SOE's solution was simple, meat laced with barbiturates. Agents carried chunks of drugged hamburger to toss at patrol. Dogs, ensuring 20 minutes of groggy silence. The trick was dosage. Too much would kill the animal and invite investigation. Too little left it woozy but still barking. One operative in Warsaw marked his meat chunks with knife nicks to indicate potency. One line for small dogs, three for German shepherds. Cats were less predictable. Their natural curiosity made them rub against legs or knock over tools at the worst moments. Some agents carried vials of valerian root extract, the feline equivalent of catnip, to distract them. Others learned to mimic mating calls. A particular trill would make male cats abandon their posts to investigate. One French resistance fighter escaped a Gestapo raid because his imitation of a queen in heat drew every alley cat in the neighborhood, creating enough commotion to cover his retreat. Birds were the ultimate messengers. Carrier pigeons got all the press, but crows were smarter and less conspicuous. The Dutch resistance trained them to land on specific windowsills where microfilm capsules could be attached to their legs. Ravens worked better for urban operations. They'd perch on church steeples until spotting a particular colored handkerchief, then swoop down to collect their payload. One SOE report mentions a starling that learned to mimic the sound of a phone ringing, signaling safe passage through a checkpoint. Rats became unwilling accomplices. Agents would tie notes to their tails with dissolving string. The animals would gnaw them off somewhere random, making the messages seem accidentally lost if discovered. Sewer workers in Paris used a variant where they'd release rats with harmless dye on their backs. The paths they took revealed which tunnels weren't guarded. The Gestapo eventually caught on, posting orders to shoot rats on sight in certain districts. Farm animals served unexpected purposes. Cows made perfect landmarks for night drops. Their dark shapes were visible against fields, and they ignored parachutists descending nearby. Goats were better alarms than dogs. They'd stampede at unfamiliar smells, but didn't bark to alert guards. One Belgian farmer trained his pigs to grunt in sequence when strangers approached, creating a crude early warning system. Insects had their uses too. Fireflies in jars became temporary marker lights for landing zones. Beetles were glued to thread and walked across desks to eavesdrop. Their tiny legs scratched vibrations into hidden microphones. The SOE even developed lice bombs, containers filled with fleas infected with fake plague, spread near German barracks to cause panic-induced lockdowns that operatives could exploit. Horses were walking liabilities. Their sharp hearing made them whinny at stealthy footsteps, so agents smeared their muzzles with molasses to keep them occupied. Cavalry patrollers could be tracked by listening for hoofbeats, though the smart ones wrapped their horses' shoes in cloth. A Polish operative once stopped a mounted patrol cold by scattering marbles ahead of their route. The horses refused to cross them. Pigeons got all the glory for good reason. The British SOE parachuted thousands into Europe with tiny leg capsules that could hold 25 pages of microfilm. The birds would fly home at dawn, often completing 200-mile journeys in under 4 hours. One especially daring mission involved attaching incendiary devices to pigeons, training them to land on German grain silos before triggering timed explosions. The Gestapo responded by ordering all homing pigeons shot on sight, which just made civilians hide them, creating perfect covers for resistance messengers. Ferrets were the unlikely stars of sabotage. Their flexible bodies could wiggle through air vents into munitions factories. Agents would tie small explosives to them with slow-burning fuses, then release them near critical machinery. The creatures were too fast to catch and too small to notice until it was too late. One German panzer division reported rodent damage to 17 tanks in a single night, the work of 2 specially trained ferrets chewing through wiring harnesses. Even fish played a role. Resistance groups near waterways would drop floating packets upstream from bridges, letting the current carry supplies right under German noses. One fisherman in Brittany trained his lobster traps to hold messages instead of crustaceans. The Gestapo never thought to check. The real pros exploited animal psychology. Knowing that German shepherds were trained to lunge at sudden movements, experienced operatives would freeze in exaggerated statuesque poses until the dogs lost interest. Others carried female dog pheromones to confuse male sentry dogs into friendly behavior. A Belgian operative famously escaped by tossing a stick. The pursuing shepherd instinctively chased it instead of him. Animals had their own dangers. A startled owl's screech could expose a hideout. Bees would swarm around agents who'd recently handled explosives due to residue smells. Worst were the geese. impossible to silence and aggressive towards strangers. One safe house was compromised when a guard goose started honking at an agent's hidden pistol. Apparently recognizing the oil smell, WWII 1944, some German units were drafting animals into service too. They used dachshunds to search narrow tunnels and falcons to intercept messenger pigeons. The Allies responded by training hawks to attack the falcons, resulting in bizarre mid-air battles witnessed by confused civilians. The lesson was clear. In the spy game, humans weren't the only players. A well-placed sparrow could be more useful than a radio. A cooperative cat might save your life. And if you thought the barn owl outside your window was just an owl, that was exactly what someone wanted you to think. A single footstep could get you killed. That was the first lesson spies learned about nighttime operations. In occupied cities, sound traveled farther at night. A cough, a sneeze, even the rustle of clothing might as well have been a gunshot. In the quiet streets after curfew, the Gestapo trained their guards to listen first, look second. The solution was felt. Spies wrapped their shoes in layers of felt strips that muffled footsteps completely. Some preferred layered wool socks over shoes instead. The best method involved pasting strips of bicycle inner tubes to the soles. They gripped surfaces without squeaking. One captured agent's field kit contained 3 sets of differently textured overshoes for various surfaces: cobblestones, wooden floors, and dirt paths. Breathing control became an art. Agents practiced inhaling through the nose, exhaling through barely parted lips. They learned to sync their breathing with ambient noise cycles, releasing breath when nearby church bells rang or when wind rustled trees. The record was held by a Belgian operative who reportedly held his breath for 87 seconds while German soldiers searched inches from his hiding spot behind a false wall. Hand signals replaced speech entirely. The SOE developed an elaborate system of 57 distinct gestures, from enemy approaching, tugging the right earlobe, to safe to proceed, brushing lint off the left shoulder. Some networks used ordinary objects as signals. Adjusting a hat brim meant one thing. Adjusting it twice meant another. One Parisian cell communicated exclusively through cigarette movements after dark. Clothing had to be silent. Buttons were replaced with fabric ties. Zippers were banned. The teeth-catching fabric made distinctive noises. Belts got taped down where they might jingle. One ingenious tailor designed coats with interior silk linings that prevented wool from making that characteristic scraping sound when arms moved. Urban environments presented unique challenges. Metal staircases vibrated. Wooden floors creaked in predictable patterns that had to be memorized. Some operatives carried small vials of talcum powder to sprinkle on suspicious floorboards. If the powder shifted when stepped on, the board was unsafe. Others learned to walk along walls where floor joists were strongest. Glass was the ultimate enemy. Breaking a window meant instant detection. Agents carried special tools for silent entry. Suction cups with embedded cutting wheels, rolls of sticky tape to catch falling shards, even jars of jelly to lubricate squeaky window tracks. One British spy perfected a method where breathing condensed moisture on glass panes made them easier to cut quietly. Communication devices required special handling. Radio dials were wrapped in fabric before tuning. Typewriter keys had rubber spacers inserted between them. Even pencils got modifications. Agents shaved down graphite to prevent scratchy noises when writing. The most paranoid operatives wrote notes by pressing through carbon paper on a soft paper below, creating noiseless impressions rather than marks. Body noises had to be controlled. Stomach growls were mitigated by chewing dried mint leaves. Joints were oiled to prevent cracking sounds. One captured SOE medical kit contained small vials of lubricant labeled for knees and elbows. Some agents trained themselves to sneeze inward, redirecting the sound into their sinuses where it was quieter. The night had its own sound profile. Smart operatives memorized local noise patterns. When bakeries fired their ovens, when milk delivery carts passed, they timed movements around these events. One operative in Marseille scheduled all his dead drops to coincide with the 2:15 a.m. sewage flush that echoed through the city's antique drainage system. Weapons needed silencing too. Knives were drawn slowly from leather sheaths to prevent the characteristic rasp. Pistols got wrapped in cloth before holstering. Some agents greased their bullets so they wouldn't rattle in magazines. The SOE even developed special ammunition pouches lined with rabbit fur that absorbed sound when opening and closing. Improvised noisemakers acted as diversions. A pebble tossed down an alley could draw guards away. Some agents carried pocket watches rigged to tick loudly when placed against metal surfaces, creating the illusion of approaching footsteps. One resistance group in Lyon used mouse traps as alarms. When tripped, they made just enough noise to warn nearby operatives without alerting distant patrols. The human ear became the ultimate surveillance tool. Experienced spies could identify individuals by their footsteps, the particular squeak of a boot, the rhythm of a stride. Some trained themselves to detect changes in ambient noise levels that indicated new patrols. One SOE report describes an agent who identified a hidden Luftwaffe airfield by listening for the unique echo pattern of planes taxiing after dark. Sound shadows were as important as visual ones. Large buildings created acoustic dead zones where conversations were safer. Railway tunnels amplified noise in predictable ways that could mask movement. Some operatives carried small wooden panels to create temporary sound barriers when needed, holding them at angles to deflect voices or footsteps. In specific directions, weather played havoc with noise discipline. Rain made eavesdropping harder, but also made surfaces quieter for foot pursuits. Snow absorbed sound but created new dangers. The crunch underfoot carried far. Fog distorted noises unpredictably, making even experienced agents misjudge distances. One operative in Rotterdam was nearly captured because winter mist made a guard's footsteps sound farther away than they were. Eventually, spies developed a sixth sense for sound. They could feel vibrations through floors before hearing the source. They recognized the slight change in air pressure that preceded opening doors. Some reported being able to taste certain frequencies, claiming metallic sounds left a coppery flavor in their mouths. The ultimate test came during silent kills. Strangulations had to be perfectly noiseless. A gurgle or gasp might alert others. The SOE taught specific pressure points that rendered targets unconscious instantly. One captured. Training manual shows detailed illustrations of where to place hands during quiet takedowns, with notes like, "Thumb here prevents trachea noises." Surviving agents often kept their noise discipline for life. Old spies could be spotted in restaurants by how quietly they handled silverware. Some never lost the habit of checking their watch by feeling the hands rather than looking. A few reportedly continued sleeping with one hand cupped behind their ear for decades after the war. Sound wasn't just something to avoid. It became a weapon in its own right. The scrape of a chair being repositioned could signal an ambush. A deliberately dropped coin might draw a guard into position for capture. Even something as simple as clearing one's throat at the right moment could save a mission. The final lesson was counterintuitive. Absolute silence was as suspicious as noise. Standing perfectly still made the body's natural sounds, heartbeat, digestion, more noticeable. The best operatives learned to emit small, natural noises at irregular intervals to blend in. One training exercise had students hum quietly while hiding, paradoxically making them harder to detect than those holding their breath completely. Sound remained the enemy's first and most reliable detection method. A shadow might be ignored. A strange shape could be dismissed. But an unexpected noise always demanded investigation. The spies who survived longest were those who mastered the art of not just moving unseen, but moving unheard. Flashlights were how amateurs got caught. The glow could be seen from hundreds of yards away, and the sudden beam ruined night vision for minutes. Spies learned to see without light instead. The human eye takes about 30 minutes to fully adapt to darkness, but once adjusted, you'd be surprised what you can make out. The SOE trained agents to sit in blacked-out rooms for hours, learning to distinguish 18 shades of black. Night vision starts with the rods in your eyes. These light-sensitive cells work better in darkness than cones do, but they need time to activate. Smart operatives would preserve their night vision by keeping one eye closed when bright lights suddenly appeared. Some wore eye patches during daytime missions, swapping them at dusk to have one pre-adjusted eye. The downside: depth perception suffers terribly with one-eyed vision. Navigation required memorization. Agents practiced walking familiar routes, blindfolded until they could count steps between obstacles. One French resistance fighter could move through his entire village at night by feeling textures underfoot: cobblestones versus dirt, brick versus wooden planks. The SOE built training courses with random debris to simulate battlefield conditions. Graduates could navigate a room filled with scattered chairs while carrying sensitive equipment without making a sound. Starlight became a tool. In open areas, without cloud cover, the Milky Way provided enough illumination to see outlines. The British developed a star navigation system where certain constellations marked safe routes. Orion's belt pointing northeast meant clear passage, while Cassiopeia in a particular position signaled danger. Some coastal agents used bioluminescent algae washed ashore as natural path markers, their faint glow invisible beyond a few feet. Urban environments had their own light maps. Moonlight reflecting off certain buildings created navigable lanes of faint illumination. Agents learned which windows were left slightly ajar, allowing interior lights to spill out just enough to see by. One report describes an operative using the periodic flash from a dentist's X-ray machine to navigate several city blocks. Shadows could deceive. The SOE warned agents about false shapes, tricks of the dark where a coat rack might look like a guard, or a tree branch appear to be a rifle barrel. Veteran spies developed a verification system. If you think you see something, turn your head slightly. Real objects move differently with perspective shifts than imaginary ones do. This saved countless operatives from firing at shadows. Peripheral vision works better in darkness than direct sight does. The rods concentrate more at the edges of your retina. Spies train themselves to scan environments by looking slightly to the side of targets. One captured German memo expressed frustration about elusive operatives who must have seen us first every time. The truth was simpler. They'd spotted the movement in their peripheral vision first. Color disappears at night. What looks like a red flower by day becomes just a dark shape after sunset. Spycraft accounted for this. Dead drop markers couldn't rely on color coding. Instead, they used texture patterns: 3 smooth stones among rough ones, or a handkerchief folded in thirds rather than halves. One network identified safe houses by door hinge positions rather than painted markers. Darkness played tricks with distance too. Sound seemed closer. Objects appeared farther away than they were. The SOE's night training included throwing exercises, where students repeatedly underestimated distances until they recalibrated their instincts. One agent's field notes contained scribbled reminders like, "Add 5 yards to all nighttime range estimates." Infiltration routes were scouted during twilight. The fading light revealed how shadows would later fall. Agents made mental maps showing which areas would be pitch black versus faintly lit hours later. One operative in Norway timed his movements to coincide with the exact moment the moon passed behind a particular mountain peak, plunging his approach path into complete shadow for 23 minutes. Weather altered everything. Fog diffused existing light sources unpredictably. Light rain made surfaces reflect more ambient light. Some spies carried pieces of various materials: wood, metal, stone, to test how they'd look under current conditions before choosing infiltration. Routes. One memorable SOE report describes an agent painting his gear different shades of gray until finding the exact tone that disappeared against wet brick. The Nazis had technological advantages. Early infrared scopes appeared in 1944, allowing some sentries to see in complete darkness. Spies adapted by learning the device's limitations. They couldn't see through glass and had a maximum range of about 200 yards. One operative foiled an IR patrol by hiding behind a greenhouse, knowing the glass would render him invisible to the sensors. Fear heightened night blindness. The SOE Medical Corps found that terrified agents literally saw less in darkness as blood shifted from their eyes to their limbs. Training included controlled panic drills where students had to complete tasks while being chased, learning to manage their terror. One instructor's noted advice: breathe through your nose to keep oxygen reaching your eyes. Electric lights were the ultimate hazard. A single exposed bulb could destroy night vision for entire teams. The SOE developed light discipline protocols where any unavoidable illumination was filtered through multiple layers of red fabric. The color least affected night adaptation. Some agents wore red-tinted goggles for hours before missions so they could read maps under dim light without losing their adjustment. Memory palaces helped. Spies visualized complex routes as sequences of tactile memories. A successful infiltration might be remembered as 7 steps past the oak door, left, hand trailing along rough wood, then 12 steps with right shoulder brushing hedge, then kneel to feel for the loose cobblestone. One captured agent's notebook contained detailed sketches of pathways traced with his fingers rather than seen with his eyes. Moon phases ruled operations. New moon nights allowed maximum movement but made navigation harder. Full moons illuminated. Too much, but helped with land identification. The ideal was a waning crescent, enough light to navigate by, but not enough to expose movement. Tide tables became essential reading since moonlight on water could unexpectedly brighten coastal areas. Eventually, darkness became an ally. Experienced operatives reported actually preferring night conditions once trained. Their adjusted eyes caught details no daylight observer would notice. The faint gleam of dew on a tripwire, the slight depression in grass where a mine was buried. One veteran described it as seeing the world as it really is, without all the distracting colors. The greatest irony? These techniques worked both ways. German sentries used many of the same methods. The night hid nothing exclusively. It merely favored whoever knew it best. Spies who forgot this often didn't survive to see dawn. As one SOE instructor put it, the dark treats all equally. The question is who's paid more attention to its lessons. Meeting another spy after dark wasn't like arranging a coffee date. Every detail had to be planned down to the second. One miscalculation could mean walking straight into a German checkpoint instead of your contact. The standard protocol allowed for no more than 3 minutes at any meet point. Just enough time to exchange papers or quick information before disappearing again. Timing was everything. The window for most meetings fell between 1:17 and 1:19 a.m. Weirdly specific, but chosen because German patrols changed shifts at 1:15 and again at 1:30. That 13-minute gap was the only predictable blind spot in their surveillance. Agents synchronized watches to railroad time, the precise timing used by train conductors across Europe. Being even 2 minutes off could be fatal. Locations followed strict rules. Busy intersections worked better than alleys despite seeming riskier. More people meant more noise to cover conversations. The ideal spot had 3 exit routes and 1 panic door, like a cellar or sewer access. One popular Paris meet point was the bench nearest the Seine at Place Saint-Michel because the river noise drowned out whispers and fleeing across water confused tracking dogs. Identification sequences were complex. The approaching agent might pause to light a cigarette with his left hand only. The waiting contact would respond by adjusting their hat 3 times. Verification sometimes involved props, a particular book title visible in a coat pocket or the way a scarf was knotted. After one network was compromised, they switched to smell identifiers. 1 dab of lavender oil behind the ear meant safe to approach. The actual exchange happened fast. Documents got passed inside folded newspapers or hollowed-out baguettes. Microfilm might be concealed in a flicked cigarette, but one inventive team used children's toys. A spinning top contained messages in its hollow core. The record for quickest handoff was 11 seconds. An SOE agent passed invasion plans inside a tram ticket before the doors closed. Abort signals were subtle but crucial. If a contact started humming, it meant danger. A handkerchief dropped accidentally warned the other to keep walking. Some used visual cues, unbuttoning the top coat button or suddenly carrying an umbrella in clear weather. One network near Chartres developed a system where scratching the right elbow meant safe, while the left meant compromised. Post-meeting protocols were just as strict. Agents never left together or in the same direction. The standard procedure was for the newcomer to depart first while the original contact waited 5 minutes. Some adopted dry cleaning routes, walking past certain shops or through specific puddles to check for followers. One operative in Lyon always stopped to tie his shoe exactly 200 yards from the meet point. The distance gave him time to spot any tails. Weather caused countless aborts. Rain made papers soggy and footsteps louder. Snow reflected too much light. Perfect conditions were overcast nights with moderate humidity. The clouds diffused any moonlight, while the moisture deadened sound. One cell in Marseille kept meticulous weather records and only scheduled meets when the barometric pressure fell between 1,013 and 1,017 millibars, the sweet spot for their operations. The personal toll was high. Imagine recognizing a friend after years apart, but being unable to speak or react. One SOE report describes two brothers who passed each other documents in Brussels without breaking cover. They hadn't seen each other since 1938 and wouldn't meet again until 1947. Another agent delivered divorce papers to his own wife during a midnight handoff near Tours. Technology eventually improved the process. By 1944, some networks used infrared blinkers, small handheld devices that flashed messages only visible through special scopes. Others developed body radios, where flesh conductivity carried Morse code through handshakes. Most remained low-tech, though. The simplest systems tended to be the most reliable when lives were on the line. Bystanders became unwitting accomplices. Street sweepers and bakers' assistants working night shifts provided ideal cover. One Brussels network paid a blind beggar to sit at their meet point. His presence explained loitering, while his disability prevented identification. Another used a prostitute who chatted up guards to distract them during exchanges. The stress reshaped behavior permanently. Surviving agents reported decades later that they still avoided making appointments on the hour or half-hour, old habits of avoiding predictable timing. Some continued choosing restaurant seats with clear exit routes. One man's family noticed. He always kept his watch 7 minutes fast, the same adjustment he'd used during wartime operations. Maps tell part of the story. Recovered operational maps show meticulous markings, not just locations, but precise spots within locations. A bench wasn't just a bench, but third plank from left, nails visible at 13 and 37 centimeters intervals. One spy circled a particular cobblestone, near the Arc de Triomphe, that had a distinctive chipped corner for dead drops. The human element remained unpredictable, though. After months of perfect exchanges, one agent was nearly captured because his contact developed a cough that ruined their silent protocol. Another network collapsed when two operatives fell in love and started extending meet times dangerously long. The SOE eventually issued rules against romantic entanglements between agents for this reason. Equipment failures caused disasters too. Gloves that muffled sound also made it harder to handle small objects. One microfilm capsule dropped during transfer rolled straight into a storm drain. Another agent froze at the key moment because his pencil wouldn't write on damp paper. After these incidents, the SOE added equipment rehearsal to training, practicing exchanges with actual props under realistic conditions. Animals complicated everything. A barking dog could force cancellation. Pigeons sometimes mistook meet points for their home coops. One disastrous encounter occurred when a stray cat rubbed against an agent's leg at the wrong moment, causing him to drop sensitive documents that scattered in the wind. After that, operatives started carrying small bags of catnip to control local strays. The strangest meet point was probably the Paris catacombs. At 60 feet underground, no surface noise carried down. Operatives learned to navigate the tunnels by feeling specific skull markers, a missing tooth here, a crack there. The ultimate dead drop spot was inside the femur of a particular skeleton marked only as Marcel in their notes. German patrols never found it, though they searched the tunnels regularly. Every meeting was a gamble, even when successful. You might get the information you needed, but also learn that half your network had been captured. Or discover the person you just trusted with your life was a stranger replacing your real contact. The only certainty was that dawn would come, and with it new dangers. So professional courtesy dictated parting with the same phrase, "Until next darkness." Black clothing made you stand out at night more than you'd think. Moonlight turns black fabric into a moving silhouette, while deep blues and grays blend better with shadows. The SOE ran tests in 1942 and found navy blue worked best for urban areas, forest green for rural zones. Spies had to consider their environment carefully. What hid you against brick walls wouldn't work near a wheat field. Fabric choice mattered as much as color. What was good for absorbing light, but too warm in summer? Cotton wrinkled loudly. The best option was a French fabric called drap militaire, a tightly woven wool-cotton blend that didn't shine or rustle. One captured agent's coat had been brushed for hours with pumice stone to create a light-absorbing texture. His notes mention spending 3 evenings just rubbing dirt into the elbows to reduce reflectivity. Buttons were a liability. Even matte finishes could catch stray light. Smart operatives sewed cloth flaps over theirs or used knotted cord fasteners instead. Belt buckles got coated with lampblack soot. One report mentions a spy who replaced all his metal zippers with silent cloth ties after nearly being spotted by moonlight glinting off his fly. Camouflage went beyond the outfit. Agents learned to localize their look. A laborer wouldn't wear spotless trousers. A businessman wouldn't have field mud on his shoes. One operative in Rouen carried different colored chalk to quickly alter his sleeve tones to match nearby walls. Another rubbed brick dust into his overcoat before night missions to better blend with urban alleys. Reversible clothing solved multiple problems. A gray coat turned tan when flipped inside out for daytime use. Some designs had different collars or cuffs on each side to change silhouettes. The French resistance favored vests with dark exteriors and light interiors. Worn inside out, they became perfect for blending into daytime crowds. One ingenious tailor in Lyon made jackets with 6 different reversible combinations using hidden seams. Women's clothing offered unique advantages. The folds and drapes of dresses could conceal items better than men's slim cuts. Some female operatives wore petticoats with hidden pockets between layers. One SOE report describes a woman hiding a pistol in her bustle that even pat-down searches missed because no German soldier wanted to appear overly familiar. Footwear posed special challenges. Leather soles reflected light unless regularly oiled. Rubber soles left identifiable prints. The solution was removable felt overshoes secured with silent cloth ties. Some agents carried different thicknesses, thin for carpeted buildings, thick for outdoor cobblestones. One network in Belgium used wooden shoes lined with rabbit fur that muffled sound while leaving misleading prints. Headgear completed the illusion. Hats had to match local styles exactly. A French beret sat differently than a Belgian one. Some agents glued subtle markers inside brims for identification. A red thread meaning "follow me," a blue one signaling danger. Women's hats worked. Even better, one Parisian spy network used hatpin placement to convey messages across crowded cafes. Gloves were essential but problematic. Leather could shine under light. The SOE developed cotton gloves with rubberized palms for grip without reflection. Some included small roughened patches on fingertips for opening windows silently. An interrogated agent confessed his gloves had been his undoing. Their unusual stitching matched only 11 other pairs issued to British operatives. Weather adaptations were constant. Rain called for treated fabrics that wouldn't darken noticeably when wet. Winter required layers that didn't bulk the silhouette. One captured handbook showed diagrams for taping sleeves close to the body to prevent snow accumulation that might alter an agent's profile. Another recommended rubbing candle wax into jacket seems to prevent telltale steam from escaping warm bodies in cold air. Disguises often involved deliberate imperfection. A factory worker's outfit would have carefully placed grease stains in plausible locations. Farmers' clothes needed authentic patches and repairs. One operative nearly blew his cover by having shirt tiers that ran the wrong direction for manual laborers. After that, the SOE hired actual textile workers to break. In operational clothing, texture could be as important as color. A velvety surface absorbed more light than a smooth one. Some agents carried small pumice stones to roughen new fabrics before missions. Others used mixtures of tea and vinegar to age materials artificially. One resistance group near Calais developed a paste made from soot and egg whites that created perfectly dull finishes when dried. The ultimate test came during extraction. Clothes had to facilitate quick changes if compromised. Many outfits included hidden seams that could be ripped open for instant transformation. A businessman's suit becoming laborer's garb in seconds. Some overcoats had linings pre-cut to separate into 2 smaller jackets. The fastest change on record took 22 seconds, documented by an observer watching an agent switch identities between tram stops. Adaptation never stopped. As German surveillance improved, so did the costumes. By 1944, some operatives wore reversible outfits with different national sewing patterns on each side. French seams outside, German cuts inside. Fabric blends evolved to include synthetic fibers that didn't reflect ultraviolet light. One captured German report lamented that their new spotlights couldn't detect the latest Allied spy clothing. The final irony? Most operatives hated their disguises. The fabrics itched, the fits were deliberately poor to appear authentic, and the constant dampness from sweat and weather rotted the fibers quickly. But as one agent wrote in his diary, better to scratch in secret than hang on display. His standard issue navy blue overcoat, pumiced and tea-stained, remains in the Imperial War Museum today, still dull enough to vanish against their gray display walls. The most dangerous moment wasn't the mission itself, it was getting home afterwards. After hours of tension, exhaustion made even professionals sloppy. Extraction plans had to account for that. The standard protocol allowed no more than 3 minutes for pickup. Missing that window meant becoming part of the landscape until night fell again. Safe return required strict timing. Most agents had a 17-minute walking radius from their objective, far enough to throw off pursuit, close enough to reach safety before dawn. Routes were planned with alternating paces, 3 minutes fast walking, 2 minutes slow, to confuse anyone tracking footsteps. One operative in Marseille perfected the drunken stagger that hit his actual speed while making him seem harmless. Prearranged signals told operatives if their safe house was still safe. A flower pot in a certain window might mean abort, while a missing curtain signaled proceed. Some used children's toys. A doll left on a doorstep in one position was safe, another meant danger. The most ingenious was a bakery that hung different bread varieties to indicate Gestapo activity levels in the area. When things went wrong, hideouts got creative. That coffin story was an exaggeration. An SOE agent really did hide in one at a funeral home for 32 hours. Another operative crawled into a freshly dug grave and pulled the dirt over himself. The record may go to the spy who spent 2 days inside a sewer pipe, breathing through a hollow reed while sewage flowed around him. Waiting out daylight required absolute stillness. One training exercise had students practice not sneezing, holding a feather under their nose for hours. Agents learned to relieve themselves without moving much, using specially designed tubes in their clothing. The SOE medics developed a tablet that slowed digestion, cutting bathroom needs during long hides. The fatigue was brutal. After adrenaline wore off, staying awake became torture. Some operatives tied their hair to nails and walls. Sharp tugs kept them conscious. Others chewed their tongue lightly or held pebbles in their shoes. One report describes an agent who stabbed his own thigh with a pin every 15 minutes to maintain focus. Dawn brought new dangers. Early risers might spot movement where there shouldn't be any. Agents had to blend into morning routines quickly, carrying a milk pail or newspaper to explain their presence. One nearly got caught because he didn't know local shops opened at different times on Sundays. After that, operatives received detailed schedules of neighborhood routines. Cleanup was crucial. Any trace of the night's activities had to disappear. Boot prints were brushed away. Discarded cigarettes, always local brands, were pocketed rather than stubbed out. One perfectionist spy carried a small broom to sweep his own footsteps as he retreated. Another used a gardening sprayer to mimic morning dew on disturbed grass. The walk home tested nerves. Morning light revealed details darkness had hidden: a torn pocket, mud stains, weapons outlines under clothing. Agents memorized alternate routes with morning cover, markets opening, deliveries being made. Some carried legitimate errand items like bread baskets to blend in. Women had it easier here. A housewife returning early raised fewer questions than a man. Final approaches were choreographed. No direct walks to safe house doors. Circling the block twice, pausing at certain shops, even chatting with neighbors, all designed to appear routine. One network had agents enter homes via back gardens rather than streets. Another used laundry lines as signals. A specific sheet pattern meant it was safe to approach. Sleep didn't come easily afterward. Adrenaline crashes made rest fitful. Many agents reported waking from nightmares by screaming, a deadly luxury. The SOE issued rubber mouth guards to prevent this. Others developed sleep routines, particular songs hummed silently, breathing patterns to calm their minds. One operative could only sleep sitting upright against doors for years after the war. Equipment checks followed every mission. Any damaged Gear was melted down or buried. Spent casings were pocketed. Firing pins left distinct marks that could trace weapons. Some networks burned all clothing after 3 uses to prevent fiber analysis. One meticulous agent dissolved his mud-caked shoes in acid rather than risk the dirt being traced to a specific location. Debriefings happened immediately. Even exhausted agents had to report details before memories faded. The SOE developed a system where operatives whispered accounts to scribes while medics treated their feet. No time wasted. One report contains bloodstains from an agent who gave his account while having a bullet dug out of his leg. The stress showed physically. Operatives aged rapidly from the constant tension. Hands developed tremors that made nighttime work harder. Some lost the ability to sleep through any noise. A blessing during missions, a curse afterward. The smart ones developed coping mechanisms. Like one agent who trained himself to only wake to specific bird calls that signaled danger. Food helped the transition. Many safe houses kept warm broth ready for returns. Easy on tired stomachs. Steam helping clear sinuses of nighttime odors. Chocolate was banned. The sugar crash worsened fatigue. Instead, they ate salty meats and pickles to retain alertness. In case of emergency, one Belgian network brewed a nasty-talking herbal tea that prevented post-mission headaches. The psychological toll mounted with each extraction. Agents reported feeling increasingly detached from daytime life. One described watching normal people shopping at markets with eerie fascination, like observing another species. Another couldn't stand bright lights for years afterward. He'd trained his eyes too well for darkness. Surprisingly, many operatives hated nights and more than missions themselves. In darkness, they were predators. Daylight reduced them to prey. Again, that transition period, when the world brightened but they couldn't disappear yet, was when most captures occurred. And the Gestapo knew it. They tripled patrols at dawn specifically to catch spies rushing home. The real pros didn't rush. They became statues in attics, ghosts in basement corners, patient shadows waiting for another night. Because survival wasn't about daring escapes, it was about outlasting the light. As one operative scrawled in his diary during a 27-hour hide, "The sun always sets again. Just have to stay alive until it does." Of course, staying alive was the hard part. Failed extractions usually meant torture rooms by lunchtime. That's why the smartest agents practiced their daytime disguises as thoroughly as their nighttime skills. Because the best way to survive the night's end? Become someone completely different when the sun came up. And make absolutely certain that person had plausible reasons for being out at dawn. The Nazis made a fatal mistake. They assumed women weren't dangerous. That oversight gave female spies their greatest weapon, being underestimated. A young woman carrying groceries could transport grenades in her market basket. A housewife complaining about ration coupons might be mapping guard rotations. The Gestapo rarely searched women thoroughly, a cultural blind spot that cost them dearly. Virginia Hall perfected the art of harmless appearances. With her prosthetic leg nicknamed Cuthbert, she posed as a milkmaid in rural France. Germans dismissed her as a simple peasant woman, even as she organized resistance networks under their noses. Her limp became part of the disguise. Soldiers would help carry her milk cans, never realizing those cans contained stolen radio parts. The very thing that should have made her conspicuous, the wooden leg, made her invisible. Female operatives leveraged domestic skills for sabotage. Knitting needles hid lockpicks. Recipe books contained coded messages. One agent baked explosives into loaves of bread. The timer was set by how long the dough needed to rise. Another poisoned an entire German officer's banquet using tainted wine poured from an ordinary carafe. The kitchen became a battlefield, and these women knew every inch of terrain. Social norms provided perfect cover. A woman alone at night drew suspicion, unless she was a nurse going to a late shift. The SOE created fake nursing credentials because Red Cross uniforms allowed midnight movements unchallenged. One operative posing as a midwife could go anywhere. At any hour, her medical bag contained penicillin vials with coded labels marking drop locations. Romance became a tactical weapon. Female agents flirted with guards to learn patrol schedules. Some accidentally dropped handkerchiefs near checkpoints to test response times. One Parisian spy had a standing date with a German communications officer. She'd purposefully lose at cards while memorizing the troop movements listed on documents he left on his nightstand. Maternal stereotypes worked even better. A woman pushing a pram could approach any checkpoint. Soldiers would make baby talk while she smuggled weapons in the carriage's false bottom. Some prams had special compartments for radio equipment, with crying doll recordings triggered if guards got too curious. One inventive agent rigged a baby bottle to dispense acid that could eat through padlocks. Hair and makeup served practical purposes. Lipstick tubes hid microfilm. Hairpins became lockpicks. One agent dyed her blonde roots gray to appear older and less threatening. Another used face powder containing crushed glass, thrown in pursuers' eyes as a distraction. Perfume bottles carried invisible ink, with different scents indicating which chemical developer to use. Laundry routines transmitted intelligence. Women hanging clothes in specific patterns could signal aircraft. A resistance group in Normandy used bedsheet colors to mark fields for parachute drops. White for safe, floral pattern for abort. Others pegged children's clothes in code. 3 shirts meaning Germans were moving east, 2 dresses indicating tank reinforcements. Gossip circles became information networks. At bread queues or water pumps, women shared coded messages amid complaints about rationing. A phrase like, "the baker's flour is moldy today," might mean a safe house was compromised. German officers never noticed how intelligence traveled through these ordinary conversations. Church activities offered movement. Opportunities. Women lighting votive candles could leave messages in the racks. Hymn selections signaled meeting times. The third hymn indicated 3 p.m. One network used confessionals as dead drops, with sins like, "I stole bread," actually listing stolen German. Equipment. The ultimate disguise was being visibly pregnant. Fake bumps allowed carrying bulky radio parts unnoticed. Some operatives wore progressively larger padding over months to sell the illusion. One agent's baby was actually a transmitter. She'd rock the bundle rhythmically to tap out Morse code. During supposed walks with her infant, shopping trips mapped enemy positions. A woman browsing hat shops might be counting trucks at a depot across the street. Grocery lists recorded artillery placements. 6 apples for 6 tanks, soft cheese. For vulnerable storage areas. One operative pretended to be simple-minded, wandering markets daily while mentally photographing everything. Domestic servants saw everything. Maids in German barracks noted which officers drank heavily before operations. Cleaners in communications rooms could read upside-down paperwork. One butler's daughter became the SOE's best source on Wehrmacht movements. She transcribed documents while dusting desks. Widows received special treatment. German soldiers often let black-clad mourners pass checkpoints with minimal scrutiny. One network had agents wear mourning veils for 2 years. The fabric conveniently hid their faces while the social expectation prevented casual conversation. Beauty salons turned into intelligence hubs. Stylists overheard German officers pillow talk while washing their hair. One manicurist filed nails while memorizing maps left on clients' laps. A Brussels salon kept a waterproof notepad in their shampoo bowl to record license plates seen through. The window, the cruelest irony? The Nazis' own propaganda helped. Their constant messaging about women belonging at home made female operatives seem non-threatening. A Gestapo training memo even warned against wasting time searching frivolous females, a phrase SOE women learned to exploit. These spies didn't just use stereotypes as cover. They weaponized the enemy's prejudice against them. The WWII war's end. German forces grew wary of all women, but too late. The damage was done. Female operatives had established that danger could come in any form, even the timid housewife asking for directions. Perhaps the greatest victory was making every Nazi second-guess who they underestimated next. After all, that sweet old grandmother might just be measuring your neck for a noose. German sentries prided themselves on vigilance, but every watch had weaknesses. The smart spies didn't avoid guards, they studied them. A typical checkpoint followed predictable rhythms. 2 minutes of alert scanning when first posted, then increasing boredom until the relief arrived. The trick was moving during that 37-second window when attention lagged, but before the fresh guard's arrival. Observational skills were everything. Agents would spend weeks tracking routines, noting when specific soldiers stretched their backs or leaned against walls. One French operative kept meticulous charts showing that Sergeant Mueller at the river crossing always smoked between 2:15 and 2:17 a.m. That 2-minute window became his regular passage time. Bathroom breaks became golden opportunities. German. Discipline demanded guards hold positions, but nature called anyway. Smart operatives learned each sentry's bladder schedule, who drank too much coffee, who snuck extra rations of beer. One network near Dijon timed sabotage operations to coincide with a particularly predictable captain's 3 a.m. toilet visit. His 7-minute absence became known as the Freedom Flush. Lighting cigarettes was another reliable tell. The act of striking a match forced guards to look down momentarily, creating a 12-second blind spot. More importantly, the glowing tip ruined their night vision for nearly a minute. A British agent codenamed Falcon developed a system where he'd only cross intersections when sentries lit up. He survived 19 months behind enemy lines using this method before retiring to a safe house with chronic lung cancer from all the secondhand smoke. Shift changes were predictable disasters. The arriving guard would be briefed, the departing one eager to leave. That 90-second overlap period was when security virtually disappeared. Experienced agents knew to watch for the triple glance. Incoming guard looking at paperwork. Outgoing one checking his watch, both briefly turning away from their posts simultaneously. Sound patterns created openings too. Heavy boots on gravel followed precise rhythms that could be memorized. One operative in Belgium could identify individual guards by their walk. The guy with a slight limp dragged his left foot every fourth step. That consistent noise masked movement when synchronized properly. Agents practiced stepping only when boot scrapes occurred. Guard rotations had predictable blind angles. As soldiers walked their routes, certain spots disappeared from view at set intervals. The SOE developed shadow maps, showing exactly when and where these gaps occurred. One such map for a Paris train yard proved so accurate that 12 separate operatives used it successfully before the war ended. Fatigue was the sentry's worst enemy. After 2 a.m., even disciplined soldiers struggled to stay alert. Operatives learned to spot the signs, slower reaction to noises, less frequent turning of the head. Some agents deliberately triggered false alarms earlier in the evening to exhaust guards before their real mission. One team had operatives roll empty bottles down streets at midnight just to make patrols complacent by 3 a.m. Weather affected security. Routines. Rain made guards huddle under eaves, shrinking their observable range. Cold weather meant more frequent trips indoors to warm up. One Norwegian agent carried a thermometer specifically to plan operations. He knew German sentries stayed outside exactly 17 minutes when temperatures dropped below -5 degrees Celsius before seeking shelter. The best infiltration specialists exploited human nature itself. Guards standing together would inevitably chat, creating distraction periods averaging 3 minutes. Lone sentries tended to hum or talk to themselves after 45 minutes of isolation. One captured SOE manual contained advice on how to whisper. Simple German phrases to make solitary guards think they were hearing voices, causing them to leave their posts to investigate nothing. Equipment failures helped too. German flashlight batteries died predictably after 6 hours of use. Smart operatives knew when units replaced theirs and planned activities accordingly. One inventive resistance member sabotaged a barracks battery supply, ensuring all nearby. Patrols would be dark by midnight. Hunger was another factor. The Germans rotated dinner schedules among units, creating predictable spikes in guardhouse activity when food arrived. Agents learned which checkpoints got their rations late and used those times for crossings. One network near Lyon even delivered free wine to certain posts, not enough to get guards drunk, just enough to make them sleepy and inattentive. Personal habits provided openings. Some guards prayed at specific times. Others carried sweethearts' letters they'd reread frequently. The Gestapo itself became a tool. When their notorious black cars appeared, regular soldiers straightened up and stared forward, creating brief blind spots behind them. One captured agent's notebook described this as the saluting gap. Patients separated survivors from casualties. The SOE estimated that waiting an extra 17 minutes increased mission success odds by 38%. Their top operatives could stand motionless for hours until conditions became perfect. One British spy spent 3 nights observing a munitions depot before noticing the guard dog handler always sneaked a cigarette at 1:47 a.m. behind the generator shed. That 90-second interval became his entry window. The ultimate trick was becoming part of the routine. Agents who moved at consistent intervals got clocked eventually. The smart ones varied their timing but mimicked predictable patterns, maybe crossing every third night at slightly different hours. After several weeks, guards would subconsciously register the activity as normal. One Dutch operative purposely got caught doing harmless things like picking night-blooming flowers near checkpoints until soldiers ignored him completely. Some networks used psychological warfare. They'd have agents walk near posts but not cross them, training guards to expect false alarms. One French cell perfected this to the point where sentries would mockingly call out, "I see you," to empty streets, then stop looking altogether. That's when the real operations began. Endurance mattered more than speed. The record for slowest infiltration went to a Dane who took 4 hours to crawl 300 meters past a watchtower. He advanced only when guards turned, sometimes waiting 14 minutes between movements. The mission succeeded because he focused on consistency rather than haste. His knees were raw for weeks afterward. Ironically, the Germans' own efficiency became their weakness. Their obsession with orderly schedules created the very patterns spies exploited. As one captured SOE report put it, "Discipline builds routines, and routines build vulnerabilities." The best operatives didn't fight the night watch. They let the watch's strictness defeat itself. All it took was someone patient enough to notice the cracks in their perfect system. The deadliest lessons came wrapped in silence. When an SOE knife clattered onto a Belgian factory floor in 1942, it didn't just alert guards, it sparked a redesign. Within weeks, armorers developed rubber-coated hilts and sheath liners that muffled metal. That's how wartime espionage worked. Every mistake wrote another line in the training manuals. Failures taught harsher lessons than instructors ever could. One agent's shoelace snapping during a rooftop escape led to new fiber testing protocols. Another's coughing fit in a Gestapo basement resulted in medics developing suppressant lozenges with honey and opium. The SOE's workshop walls were papered with accident reports, each one a blueprint for improvements. Moonlight betrayed more agents than informants did. Early operatives learned the hard way that shadows move as the night progresses. After a disastrous 1943 raid where 6 agents were caught in shifting light, missions began, including moon phase calculations. Astronomical tables became as vital as maps. Knowing when Jupiter would rise could mean the difference between invisibility and exposure. Sound traps were another brutal educator. An agent whistling absent-mindedly cost a Brussels network 18 lives. That incident spawned noise discipline training where recruits spent weeks moving through obstacle courses littered with dry leaves and glass shards. Failment starting over. The record was 47 attempts before silent passage. Tradecraft evolved through near captures. When a French operative's false mustache came loose during interrogation, the SOI developed waterproof spirit gum. Another spy's glasses. Reflecting candlelight led to non-reflective lenses. Even trivial details got overhauled. One mission failed because an agent's expensive English dental work looked suspicious. After that, all operatives got local-style tooth modifications. The Gestapo's interrogation methods forced defensive innovations. Early captured agents cracked under standard sleep deprivation, so trainers began exposing recruits to 72-hour endurance tests. When thumbscrews appeared in reports, the SOE issued lockpicks small enough to manipulate handcuff mechanisms. One ingenious response to waterboarding was secretly developed. Agents trained to swallow lengths of hollow reed beforehand to maintain airflow. Equipment failures spawned entire new technologies. A sticky pistol slide during a firefight resulted in Teflon-coated firearms. Boots leaving identifiable prints brought about interchangeable sole plates. Perhaps the oddest was the teeth radio, a dental implant containing a microtransmitter. Developed after too many agents were caught with hidden sets, Animal Encounters rewrote protocols. That Belgian shepherd that wouldn't stop barking? Now agents carried aniseed-soaked rags to throw tracking dogs off scent. Cats' tripping motion sensors led to operatives dosing fish scraps with sedatives. Even rats played their part. After one gnawed through vital wiring, waterproof casings became mandatory for all field electronics. Weather was another merciless instructor. A sudden frost in Normandy revealed breath vapor as a giveaway, leading to face mask designs. Heavy rain in Rotterdam showed dark clothing actually became more visible when wet, hence the shift to gray-blue fabrics. Fog helped develop infrared signaling systems after 3 agents got separated and captured during a simple exfiltration. The human body itself was full of betrayals. Digestive noises prompted development of gas-suppressing tablets. Eyeballs reflecting light birth contact. Lenses that absorbed visible spectrum. Even blinking became regulated. Agents learned to synchronize eyelid movements with ambient light pulses to avoid telltale glints. Documentation procedures transformed through losses. When coded letters were intercepted because the paper quality was wrong, the SOE set up local stationery mills. Invisible ink failing under candle heat led to temperature-resistant formulas. One memorably disastrous dead drop involving a compromised library book resulted in a complex cipher based on specific editions' typographical errors. Medical adaptations came from grueling experience. Field surgeries taught that silk sutures were quieter than catgut when sewing wounds in hiding. A botched tooth extraction showed local anesthetics could slur speech during interrogations, prompting switch to cocaine-based alternatives. The worst lessons involved compromised suicide pills. After several failed activations, the L tablets got redesigned with quicker-acting cyanide compounds. Psychological warfare tactics evolved likewise. When Germans started rescuing captured agents to gain trust, the SOI instituted mandatory betrayal scenario training. Guards pretending to be resistance members taught operatives to demand specific code phrases. Even gift offers became suspect. After one agent was poisoned via thank you chocolates, all food from unknown sources got tested with biological assay kits. Communication failures yielded technical leaps. A radio operator's arrested breath, causing Morse inaccuracies led to diaphragm control exercises. Microfilm deteriorating in damp conditions spurred waterproof coating research. The ultimate irony was carrier pigeons outsmarting their handlers. Their tendency to occasionally ignore drop points resulted in backup human courier networks. Transportation mishaps forced redesigns. Bicycles with rattling chains were replaced with belt drive models. Silent shoes that dissolved in heavy rain led to layered overshoe systems. Even the humble button caused problems. After several snapped during stressful moments, reinforced shank designs became standard issue. German counterintelligence successes became Allied study material. Every captured gadget was reverse-engineered. For weaknesses, whenever a spy was caught, analysts would reconstruct exactly which protocols had failed. Painstaking attention was paid to Gestapo after-action reports, sometimes purchased from corrupt officials. The final exams were real missions where failure meant death. Graduates of this brutal curriculum didn't receive diplomas. They carried revised equipment bags and updated codebooks. Their real credential was having survived the apprenticeship where error margins were measured in blood. As one instructor reportedly told recruits, better to learn from others' fatal mistakes than make your own. What emerged wasn't perfect, but it was adaptive. The night remained dangerous, just slightly less so for those who'd memorized its hard lessons. Training evolved continuously. Today's cutting-edge technique would be next month's abandoned relic. Because in the shadows, stagnation was extinction. The only constant was that darkness always had more to teach if you lived long enough to learn it. The techniques developed in World War II didn't disappear when the war ended. They just got upgraded. Modern special forces still use Virginia Hall's principle of the weaponized mundane. That boring janitor mopping the CIA lobby floors, probably noticing everything while appearing invisible. The difference is his mop bucket now contains hidden cameras instead of grenades. Night vision tech leapt forward, but the basics stayed the same. Today's goggles amplify light 50,000 times, yet operators still avoid direct moonlight, just like their 1940s counterparts. The infrared beams locating enemies? Those evolved from the simple pocket mirrors SOE agents used to peek around corners. Even retinal scanning has roots in World War II observation techniques. Trainers noticed skilled spies could identify individuals by how their eyes reflected light differently. Encrypted communications changed completely, yet remained familiar. No more knitting patterns signaling bombing targets. Now it's quantum encrypted satellite bursts. But handlers still teach the same lesson. Assume every transmission gets intercepted. The CIA trains recruits using Virginia Hall's dead drop methods before introducing digital alternatives. Some things can't be improved. Human carelessness remains the weakest link. Surveillance avoidance still relies on World War II fundamentals. That corporate executive checking his watch 3 times could be timing guard rotations like 1944 operatives did. Modern safe houses still use layered defenses, just with smart locks instead of oiled floorboards. The NSA's Guide on Light Discipline reads almost identical to SOE manuals, except now it warns about smartphone screens instead of cigarettes. Some tactics became obsolete through technology. Microfilm seems quaint when you can store terabytes in a grain of rice. Carrier pigeons can't compete with laser data transmission. Yet pigeons still carry advantages. They're harder to trace than electronics. The French DGSE actually maintains a pigeon core for emergencies when satellites get jammed. Female operatives still leverage stereotypes, just differently. That social media influencer geotagging military bases could be updated tradecraft. The CIA's profiling unit found modern security personnel still subconsciously discount well-dressed women, a bias exploited worldwide. Virginia Hall's milkmaid routine evolved into corporate tourism, where spies pose as clueless business travelers. Animals retain unexpected roles. Dolphins detect underwater sensors better than machines. Army ants map jungle trails more reliably than drones in certain conditions. Even rats still have jobs. Their ability to sniff out landmines remains unmatched after 80 years of attempts to build better detectors. The psychological warfare playbook barely changed. Modern stress positions used in interrogations originated from Gestapo techniques, just rebranded with scientific names. Sleep deprivation methods got polished, but follow identical principles. Even honey trap operations mirror World War II protocols. Only now they collect digital nude blackmail instead of handwritten love letters. Weapons evolved, yet solve the same problems. Silenced pistols got quieter, but still use principles from the well rod. Knife fighting techniques taught today derive straight from Fairbairn Sykes manuals. The latest ceramic knives don't show up on metal detectors, but serve the same purpose as blackened 1940s blades. Quick, quiet kills. Low-tech solutions often still work best. A folded newspaper hides things better than some electronic scramblers. Against facial recognition, dead drops using park bench bolts outperform encrypted email in high-security zones. One MI6 case officer got caught in 2019 because he forgot the old trick of checking for broken surveillance patterns before meetings. Technology hadn't changed the basic human tells. Training maintains eerie continuities. CIA recruits still practice holding still for hours like their SLE predecessors. The Terror House obstacle course at Langley includes 1940s-style floorboard squeak tests alongside laser tripwire drills. Modern operatives learn shadow movement techniques unchanged from photos in captured German counterintelligence manuals. The biggest legacy might be institutional memory. Every captured spy since 1945 has been psychologically profiled against World War II-era interrogation reports. NSA algorithms still incorporate Gestapo document analysis patterns. Even airport security derives from Luftwaffe POW screening methods. The random questioning technique started with Hermann Goering's security teams. Some adaptations came from enemy innovations. The Stasi's improvement on Gestapo surveillance directly inspired modern counterterrorism tactics. Soviet upgrades to Nazi radio direction finding evolved into today's electronic warfare systems. Ironically, ISIS training manuals quote extensively from captured SS documents about urban resistance. Private sector security absorbed these lessons too. Corporate espionage defenses mirror SOE safe house protocols. Executive protection details use bodyguard techniques developed for Churchill during the Blitz. Even supermarket loss prevention borrows from Gestapo shop surveillance methods. The fake customer browsing near high-theft items is straight out of 1943 Berlin. Medical advancements came from dark places. Modern trauma surgery techniques originate from wartime field hospitals treating spies. The CIA's enhanced interrogation resistance training uses physiological data gathered from let's just say unwilling World War II subjects. Even sports medicine benefits from Nazi experimentation on how far humans can push physical limits. The irony is that despite all our tech, humans remain predictable. Guards still slack off during shift changes. Moonlight continues to expose movement. Fatigue breaks concentration as ruthlessly now as in 1944. Maybe that's why classified CIA training films still show World War II footage, to remind new recruits that fancy gadgets can't fix fundamental human weaknesses. The greatest continuum? Secrets still hide best in plain sight. That unremarkable office building could contain a black site. Your neighbor's dull hobby might cover surveillance activities. Modern spies don't wear disguises. They become unremarkable through careful curation of boring details. Just like Virginia Hall blending into farmland, today's operatives vanish into corporate parks and suburban neighborhoods. Yet some mysteries endure. Classified archives suggest World War II developed techniques so effective they remain undisclosed 80 years later. Rumor says certain shadow movement methods and light distortion technologies were deemed too valuable to standardize. The night that in 1940, Spies still keeps some of its oldest secrets. No algorithm has fully decoded why certain low-tech tricks from that era continue outperforming satellites in field tests. Perhaps some lessons only reveal themselves when lives are truly on the line. Night wasn't just darkness. It was the ultimate weapon. World War II spies turned shadows into allies, using them better than their enemies did. They moved unseen, spoke silently, and disappeared completely. But here's the question. Would GPS and night vision make their jobs easier today? Maybe. Or maybe all that tech just creates new ways to get caught. The best tricks from the 1940s still work because they exploit human weaknesses, not tech flaws. That's why spy agencies still study these old methods. Because no matter how advanced we get, darkness keeps its secrets. Lights out.